Remember iPods? What happened to them? And how is it using one in 2024? Well, this is the iPod 5th generation. And the design feels timeless in my opinion, with the click wheel on the bottom and the screen on the top. But that's not the only model that they make. They also had a lot of other interesting iPods that I will show you in this video. And they were very popular back in the day, but now almost no one uses them. And that's because of one simple reason, and that is a smartphone. Why would you carry around a separate device if you can just use your phone? Because on a smartphone there are lots of cheap streaming services available, for example Spotify or Apple Music. And back in the day you used to pay per song instead of paying for a subscription service. And of course nowadays iPods are not impressive at all. But back then it was really cool that you could carry around all your music on one tiny device. And remember that this was at the time where people were using CDs to play music. So an iPod is much more smaller than a single CD alone. Apple wasn't the first one who made an MP3 player, but they did do it right. And it was easy for the average consumer to use. And the 5th generation that I have here still uses the old 30-pin connector from Apple. This is a really big connector and it only works in one way, you can't reverse it. And if you want to change settings, it doesn't have a touchscreen, so you need to use the click wheel. You can scroll through the menus by rotating the wheel. And it doesn't have Bluetooth, of course, so if you want to listen to audio, you just need to plug in your headphones. Or you could connect it to a dock with a 30-pin connector. But sadly, my iPod 5th generation doesn't work. And that is because it has a hard drive inside. And hard drives have moving components, which means that a hard drive is much easier to get damaged. And that happened to mine, so it won't be able to turn on anymore, except when I changed the hard drive. However, luckily times change and Apple also released other versions that didn't have a hard drive. For example, the iPod Nano. This is the iPod Nano 2nd generation. And it is so much smaller compared to the regular iPod. It's very light and also tiny, so you can easily carry it around. And of course, because it is smaller, it does have limitations. So the iPod Nano had a lot less storage, for example, compared to the regular bigger iPods. And this one also doesn't work because it has a swollen battery, so that broke the screen. And what I really like about the iPods from Apple is that they actually were experimenting with different form factors, which you don't see Apple doing that often anymore. So when we go even smaller, you have the iPod Shuffle 3rd generation, and this thing was insane. It was even smaller and it only has a single port, which is the headphone jack, and no controls at all. Just on the top, an on and off switch. So you might be wondering, how do you even charge that thing? Well, it's through the headphone jack. Yes, charging a device through a headphone jack sounds insane, but it actually works. And because it doesn't have any buttons or controls apart from the power button, you can't adjust volume on the device itself. You need to use your headphones to change volume or skip to a different song. And if your headphones don't have any controls, then you can't control the device. So you are stuck at one level of volume. Of course, this is not the most practical iPod, but it's still really cool that they could get something so small. And I like how unique the design of it is, with no crazy logos. It's just one simple device. Another iPod with a really innovative and interesting design was the Nano 6th generation. It was a small aluminium iPod with the touchscreen on the front. And some people even saw it as an opportunity to turn it into a watch. So this is kind of like the first Apple Watch. And there were companies making watch bands for the iPod Nano 6. So it had a clip on the back and you could clip it in. And that way you kind of have a watch that could also play music. And it was so cool for the time, and it looks like it's running on iOS, but it actually isn't. It's a custom software, but the icons are from the old iOS 6. And this thing still had the 30-pin connector and a headphone jack. After the Nano 6th generation, they released something that looks really different, which is the iPod Nano 7. Now you can't really use it as a watch anymore, but it does have a bigger screen, so you could watch videos. And this was the last Nano that they created in 2012. And it was the first and only Nano that had Bluetooth. So instead of using wired headphones, you could actually use wireless headphones. And again, this also looks like it's running on an old version of iOS. But you can't install any apps on here. But when you connect headphones that have a microphone in them, you will get a secret app, which is the voice recorder app. And then you also had the iPod Touch lineup, which is just an iPhone but without a SIM card. So this is one of the later models, the iPod Touch 5th generation, which does run on full iOS and also has App Store support. But sadly the iOS on the 5th generation is outdated, so you can't do that much with it anymore. But it did have a decent camera. So how is it using an iPod in 2024? Well, of course it still works completely fine and it's still a fun experience in my opinion. But it doesn't have a lot of advantages compared to using your own phone. But in my opinion, it's sometimes really fun to use a dedicated device meant for one thing. One thing to keep in mind is that these iPods are old, which means that they don't have the best battery life anymore. Some work completely fine, but others have terrible battery lives and can't last you for much longer than 30 minutes. So make sure that if you want to get one with a good battery life. But what do you think of the iPod? Are you planning on buying one or do you still use one in 2024? Let me know in the comments down below, and thank you so much for watching.